Welcome back to another episode of Wicked Darkness. I'm Kathy, and with me I have Steve, and soon to be joining us will be Leah. She stepped away for a second, but she'll be back. So we're talking about the Salem Witch Trials. And for those that don't know, Salem Witch Trials were, pretty popular back in 1692. There was a lot of people that were scared of different diseases that were going on, and they didn't know what was happening, so they kind of blamed it on witchcraft and being bewitched. They believed in a lot of demons and stuff like that, and very religious people, because those are the Puritans and stuff. So there was 3 girls. I wouldn't say teenagers, preteens, 9, 11, and 12, I believe. 2 of them were the relatives. One was a daughter, one was a niece of a new reverend in Salem. And then they have their good friend. And so they started showing signs of fits. And because of that, a doctor came in to diagnose them and wasn't able to really figure out what was going on with them. So he kind of just said that they were bewitched. And then it snowballed from there. And it just gotten worse. There was about 19 men and women that were killed during the witch trials. So Salem, they not to say they embrace it, but they've kind of embraced it now, I guess you would say. They know that they did wrong and they tried to fix it. And so if you go to Salem, there's now a wall with the names of the victims on this wall in these stones. So with that, we're actually right now we're recording this on June 11th, and June 10th was the beginning of the trials. And actually it was actually the day of the first person that the accused that was hanged that day. And that one actually was Bridget Bishop. So do you guys know anything about Bridget?
I'm trying to see. Looking at my notes, and they're all jumbled up here.
Story of my life. So
I mean, off the top of my head, I remember there's 3 of them. I think there was the older woman, who I believe she was widowed. I don't remember her name. I can't find I took some notes here.
Well, that would probably be Bridget. Bridget was actually accused 12 years prior to the Salem Witch Trials.
Yeah.
For witchcraft. So I'm thinking that's probably the one that you're talking about.
Yeah, and isn't she the one that, for a lot of different reasons, people really didn't like her to begin with. She wouldn't conform with the norms of dress, and they thought she was just not wanting to conform to the ways of the village.
Mm-hmm.
And these people didn't like her from the beginning.
Yeah, so the new reverend, that would be Samuel Paris. He became the new reverend, and it became where it was kind of like a social outing of people. If you weren't of the social norm, then you were outed as a witch. So it was more of, you have to conform to the ways that the reverend likes, otherwise you're not one of us. And that's kind of what happened with her. She just didn't want to conform, like you said, to anything. But it was like a social, here's the hierarchy of the social group. And then down here is the people that just don't care. The widow that doesn't care about what Joe Schmo next door is doing and just wants to live her life and be on her own, which I don't blame
Yeah,
her.
they had the second time she was accused, 10 witnesses testified against her. And as you go through all this, I mean, you realize a lot of this too was like, oh, I don't really like her, or these people, so hey, I'm going to accuse them of witchcraft.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so like I was saying yesterday, was the day that the official execution resulting from the witch trials in Salem, Massachusetts took place as Bridget Bishop was hanged. And the trials were the result of a mass hysteria of witchcraft that gripped Salem village. So I didn't realize when I set this up where I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about the Salem witch trials. That actually was like the next day. I think that's kind of weird. I didn't do it on purpose, I swear. But that's where we're at. It's kind of cool though, is that connection. I'm like, huh, look at that, like we're talking about this 400 years later, and it's still a thing.
Yeah, any of you look, I mean, there's a lot of documentaries and a lot of movies and concerning some of them are not quite historically accurate. Um, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but it's interesting, and I mean, I haven't thought about it for a long time until you brought it up, and just reading about it the last few days, it's really interesting. It just, you can really see more than it being witchcraft, that it is not conforming to the ways of the times, and neighbors against neighbors, and neighbor disputes and all that kind of good stuff.
Right. And like I said, they're kind of Salem nowadays is kind of embrace the witch um logo, and I guess you could say. So like my family were a bunch of firefighters. So the Salem Fire Department there actually has a witch as their on their logo on their trucks and on their patches. So they've kind of embraced the witchcraft of everything, which is kind of cool.
It brings a lot of money into their area,
Oh yeah,
tourist wise.
right. And doesn't Hocus Pocus, doesn't they have something to do with Salem too? Aren't they
It
when they
might
did
be.
Hocus Pocus?
That might be.
I want to say that was in Salem, but I'm not positive. Sounds familiar, but don't quote me on that one. So, Leah, you wanted to talk about who was it that you wanted to talk about again? Colin?
Giles. Mr.
Yes.
Giles.
Yes, that was it. Oh, I don't know why I said Collins. Don't mind.
Giles Corey?
Yeah.
Yeah, my
I
buddy
need
here.
more light. I got old eyes. I need more light.
The reason I wanted to bring up Giles Corey was because he was one of the men that were targeted during the Salem Witch Trial. But unlike everybody else, he actually died of being pressed. So he was pressed to death. Yes.
Okay.
So, most of the time, so I'll just kind of read through what I have here. And this is from, of course, my Tudor history here. So most of the time, due to their social status or envy from a fellow neighbor, men were also targeted. So in the Salem Witch Trials of 1692, greedy landowners eager to settle old scores got in the paranoid bandwagon initiated by the girls. And the girls, we were talking about the ones that had originally started this whole thing by having fits and then saying it was through witchcraft.
Right. And those girls, like I said, were Harris's daughter, Betty, age 9, his niece, Abigail Williams, age 11, and their friend, Ann Putnam Jr., age 12.
Mm-hmm. So initiated by the girls, and then made worse by like religious leaders. As can be expected, it wasn't long before Giles Corey was named. Like the accused, Giles Corey was a devout Christian whose only crime was being Martha Corey's husband. Martha was named by the girls and subsequently arrested March 19th of 1692. This enraged Giles. However, due to his strong faith, he was willing to withhold that anger and hear, and like in quotations, evidence presented against his wife. Since there was no one to speak for his wife, there was no one to speak for him either. And when he and others were apprehended a month later, among the lot was Abigail Hobbs, who was successfully frightened into accepting a plea deal that got her to name other names and accuse new people. Giles Corey happened to be one of the ones that she accused. So she claimed that he's a wizard who, along with John Proctor, has signed their name in the Devil's Book, and together with witches, had caused many of the girls' afflictions. So, and she had wrote, I saw the apparition of Giles Corey come and afflict me, urging me to write in his book, and so he continued to most dreadfully hurt me by the time beating me and almost breaking my back to the day of his examination, being the 19th April, 1692. And then also during the time of his examination, he did affect and torture me most grievously, and also several times since urging me to write in his book, and I verily believe it with my heart that Giles Corey is a dreadful wizard, for since he has been in prison, he or his appearance has come to the most grievous tormented me. So that was her deposition. And like so many of the accused, Giles Corey offered a plea and asked to declare himself guilty or not guilty at the trial. He refused, either or. Had he agreed to the pleas the prosecution offered him or declared himself guilty, he would have awaited this horrific end, but that would have meant that his property would have been confiscated and he would have been hung. So he was looking back in these days, in which I hated the most, is it was typically guilty before trial. If you were accused, you're pretty much guilty. So angered by stubbornness, religious leaders and law enforcement subjected him to torture. Sheriff George Goodwin ordered the accused to be placed on a wooden board after he ordered his men to place rocks and bricks on his chest. He was subject to torture for 2 days.
Hoping for him to confess?
Correct. Each day he was asked if he would enter a plea, and he refused and finally gave a concrete answer on the second day, expecting him to give in. Giles Corey stuck to his guns, telling his inquisitors more wait, and that is what they did. Hours later, when his life ended, they hung his wife 3 days later. Sorry, not hours later, 3 days later.
Wow.
So of the men that were executed, there was 6 of them. So it was Giles Corey, John Proctor, George Burrow, George Jacob Sr., John Willard, and Samuel Wardwell. Everybody else was hung except for Giles. What got to me was, and I wanted to look up here because this is from salemlibraryvirginia.edu. I was reading through this, and I had saw, because Giles stood mute, he was given the dreaded sentence of pene forte et diro. Even in his procedure had been determined to be illegal by the government of Massachusetts. This was illegal for 2 reasons. There was no law permitting pressing, and it violated the Puritan provisions of the Body of Liberty regarding the end of barbarous punishment. In the entire history of the United States, Giles Corey is the only person who have ever been pressed to death by the order of the court.
Wow. Can you imagine? Did they ever say how much weight was actually put on him?
Good question.
Because, how much pressure does it, I mean, I don't know how big the man was, but how much pressure, and just think of like the weight, and his ribs are breaking, his lungs are collapsing. You can't get a full breath in.
And how long did you say it took? Two days of torture?
2 days of torture.
As I'm looking, scanning, I didn't want to change the subject, but I'm looking at these tests they gave these people that were accused. It's so crazy, like the swimming test they would take, if you floated, you were guilty, and if you sunk, you weren't. I mean,
Right.
yeah, how crazy is that, just these other ones, like the prayer test, they have you recite the Lord's Prayer. And if you can't go through with it, you're guilty. And, like I had read, the people would be nervous and scared, and they might miss a word or two, and that's it. You're guilty. You can't say the Lord's Prayer.
Right.
Crazy stuff,
So for those who didn't know what a penne forte et dure is, it's obviously Latin, but it's a fearsome practice that entailed pressing the accused with weights until he or she agrees to enter a plea. It also means a long and hard punishment.
And even still, okay, so if he pleaded guilty, they'd still hang him.
Right.
Correct.
I mean, we crushed you. Oh, I guess you're innocent. Sorry.
Yeah, same thing. We threw you in the water and you drowned. You're innocent. All right.
Yeah. Oh, whoops.
Yeah, and crazy stuff.
You wonder what was going through their minds back then. The idiocy of their thinking is like,
what's the thought process behind? Well, I know the swimming one had to do with because they assumed that the accused weren't baptized, so the water would reject them. That was their thought process on that. And if the water didn't reject them, well, then they were obviously innocent. Yeah.
Not the fact that they can swim versus they can't swim.
Right. Well, when you're tied up and lowered on it with a board, into the water, like a teeter-totter type of thing.
Right.
And it said sometimes they tied a rope to them, but sometimes they still drowned anyways. So.
God.
This is weird.
As we talk, I'm like looking to see if they ever talked about how much was put on him, but so far I haven't really found anything. I just know that the pressing happened by Captain John Gardner of Nantucket.
I mean, I saw some pictures that, it looks like just giant rocks, 3 or 4 feet high on the guy,
Right. These aren't little
No.
across the water kind of rocks. I mean,
right.
these are heavy rocks. They've got weight to them. So Salem Witch Trials happened between June 1692 to May 1693. Almost an entire year, which is crazy to think about now. And that the 19 convicted quote unquote witches that were hanged and for him crushed, many others were imprisoned in what was known as Salem Village. And this is a thing I didn't realize at the time. A friend of mine went to Salem and told me that, there are 2 Salems. And I kind of sat there and looked at her. I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, there's technically 2 Salems. So where the witch trials were taking place and where they were in prison were 2 different things. I go, really? And then looking through, doing all the research and stuff like that, sure enough, Salem Village is in Massachusetts Bay Colony, now known as Danvers, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
So that's where they were imprisoned at. So if you ever go to Salem and wanted to go visit to actually see all of it, of the witch trials, you actually have to go to 2 different locations. It's not far away, but. And the other thing was, so according to this article that I found about the Salem witch trials, this says that the events in Salem in 1692 were but one chapter in a long story of witch hunts that began in Europe between the 1300s and 1330s and ended in the late 18th century. And the last known execution for witchcraft was taken place in Switzerland in 1782. The Salem trials occurred late in the sequence after the witch trials or witch hunt in Europe, which peaked between 1580 and 1590s to the 1630s and 40s. Some 3/4 of those European witch hunts took place in West Germany, the Low Countries, France, Northern Italy, and Switzerland. The number of trials and executions varied according to the time and place, but it's generally believed that some 110,000 persons in total were tried for witchcraft, and between 40 to 60,000 were executed. That's a huge number.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Just because, you can float, you're a witch. You sink, you're not a witch.
So you die either way.
Yeah. I understand that there was like a huge thing back then of like being scared. There was a strong belief like of the devil and demons, and then like in the Salem village, the rivalry between the households and stuff like that, like she looked at me weird, or they had this on that. I mean, it even came down to like a freckle on somebody. Well, they have that birthmark, or they have, they're a witch.
That was one of the tests, was the birthmarks and moles and freckles and, the scratch test.
Right.
Oh, if I scratch you because you turned me into a demon or whatever, and you don't bleed, then you're not guilty. So they would just scratch them until they bled.
Right.
I mean, like this such. I mean, you were damned if you do or damned if you don't. If you pleaded guilty or not,
Right. And it didn't help at all. There was a time period though that eventually the trials had to end at some point. And the reason why they kind of ended was because there was a governor who how'd that go? His wife, I want to say, was let me find it here. So the governor of Massachusetts, Massachusetts Bay Colony, it was Sir William Phipps, and over the following years, many of the trials were held and many people were in prison. The trials continued, blah, blah, blah. But after his wife, that's who it was accused, he again interceded and ordered that a new court be established that would not allow so-called speculatory evidence. And by May of 1693, everyone in custody under conviction or suspicion of witchcraft had been pardoned by the governor. He finally was like, my wife is not a witch. You people have lost your minds. This craziness needs to come to an end. We're killing people for no reason because you say it's this, but there's no hard evidence. Where's your facts on this? And that's where he's just like, enough is enough.
Yeah. I was just looking at stuff here too. One of these accusers, testified against 16 different people. Well, how many people were affecting you like this? You know what I mean? It's just, It's just crazy.
And so we said that it started with these 3 girls, and they apparently began indulging in fortune telling. And in January 1692, Betty and Abigail increasingly got stranger behavior, described by at least one historian as a juvenile delinquency that included these fits. They'd scream, they made odd sounds, they threw things, they contorted their bodies, they complained of biting and pinching sensations. I mean, these girls sitting in court and they're like, perfectly fine one minute, and the next minute they're screaming at the top of their lungs because, oh my God, this person's going to get off. So, okay, oh my God, you pinched me. Oh my God, I can feel it. I'm burning. I feel this. And of course they take it for these girls are actually telling the truth, and they're not.
Mhm.
But when they talked about modern science, scholars were saying that these fits that these girls were showing or demonstrating at the time, they said that it could be resulted from some combination of asthma, Lyme disease, epilepsy, child abuse, delusional psychosis, and convulsions. And that the last of the diseases was because of eating bread or cereal made of rye that had been infected with a fungus. And that it could elicit vomiting, choking, fits, hallucinations, and sense of something crawling on one's skin. And they said the equivalent to it is a hallucinogen known as LSD.
Yep.
So,
But and I read that and I thought about that, but like, how long would this stay in their system? You know what I mean? Or did they finally just like, you know what, I've been doing this for so long, I better keep on going on with this, because I mean, they didn't really get anything out of it,
right.
you know.
But
There
how
was
much
no
trouble could they get into if they found out that
right,
they had been lying?
right,
Especially the one being the Reverend's daughter and the other one being the niece.
yep,
And all of a sudden it's like, oh God, we have to keep this going. But obviously it didn't just stop at these girls because there's other witnesses. So who else in the village was complaining, oh, you didn't sell me bread, so you're now a witch.
Right.
Or I said hello to you and you ignored me, you're a witch. Well, nowadays we call you something else, but it would sound like witch, but with the B. But it's like, what were these people thinking? And then they were saying that the trials progressed and accusations spread to individuals from other communities, like Boston, Charlestown, Beverly, Gloucester. And then there was a person, a Cotton Mather's father, who was an influential minister and president of Harvard, that was condemned and condemned the use of the speculatory evidence, and then they favored the direct accusations and stuff. So, but still, 19 people died because of these people. And then that's just the ones that died. That's not even including the ones that were convicted or that were imprisoned.
right. Several people died in jail.
Mm-hmm. There was like, let's see. There was Bridget was the first one, and they were hung at what's called Gallows Hill in Salem Village. So that happened on June 2nd. On June 19th, 5 more were convicted and were hanged, including nurse and Good, the latter of whom responded to her conviction by saying that she was no more of a witch than the judge was a wizard. George Burroughs, who had served as a minister in Salem Village from 1680 to 1683, was summoned from his new home in Maine and was accused of being the witch's ringleader. He too was convicted along with 4 others and was hanged on August 19th. And as he stood at the gallows, he recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly, something no witch was thought to be able to do, which is what you said, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
Raising doubts about his guiltiness. And then there was like protests that were refuted, and then Mather, who was present, Mather's role in the trials in general was complex. And then on September 22nd, 8 more were convicted and were hanged, including Martha Corey, who Giles, that's the wife, and then Giles refused to do the plea deal, and that was when he died of the stoning. Well, not stoning, but putting stones
Crushing.
on. Yeah,
Pressing.
Yeah. So
Well, I also think this whole thing, the hysteria and whatnot, is because there was a confession by one of the accused, Tituba.
Yeah, wasn't she the slave or
Yeah,
someone's servant?
correct.
Right.
wasn't she the one teaching the girls about fortune telling?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. With the, was it tea and something else they were using, or eggs? I think it was with the egg yolk and something else I read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they
So
were
like
doing
Sarah
some voodoo
Good,
stuff.
yeah, because Sarah Good and Osborne were like denying their guilt, but because she confessed, thinking she was going to save herself from conviction by acting as an informer, she claimed there were other witches that were acting alongside her in the service of the devil. So that only spread the hysteria even more because now they're hearing like, oh, this is actually true and really happening.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's not being made up. Or maybe any doubters were kind of going, oh, this, okay, so somebody's actually saying we've done this. And yes, you're right. I've been involved in this. And that is where I think a lot of this hysteria came in. But it kind of goes to show, and we saw it again. We see it all the time, but we saw it again, especially in like 2020 and just recent COVID stuff. We as humans alone are usually pretty smart and critical thinking. But when we get into groups, that mass thought process, we get stupid and we do terrible things. And that was probably one of the worst events of history that took place.
Right. Oh, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Steve.
I'm just going to say, I just think that, what you're talking about, this mass hysteria, this group mentality that, oh, it's okay, because it must be okay because look at everybody else, and it's just, yes. And then and there's just troublemakers, and you can just take that right back to the witch trials. These are just people who just thought this would be something to do. And that's what I believe of everything I read. I just think most of this was, I'm going to get you because you said earlier, I want your land. I want your business. You didn't sell me this. I don't like the way you looked at me. I don't like the way you dress. And it just all rolls into a big ball. And, people justify their actions that way.
Right. Right. And it doesn't stop. It just continues on, and I always say, like, history repeats itself, and
right. Learn from your past mistakes.
Right. And that's kind of what Salem did. So Salem, like, oh my God, we just killed these people and they're actually innocent. Now what are we going to do about it? So what they did was they gave money to the victims' families. And they kind of just like, we're very sorry we did this or that. But then, so they ended up paying some 600 pounds, because it's pounds, it was British at the time. 600 pounds to the family of the victims. There, in 1957, the state of Massachusetts formally apologized for the trials. And it wasn't until, now the trials happened in 1692, right?
Yeah.
Or the things happened in 1692. So it wasn't until 2001 that at least 11 of the convicted were fully exonerated. That's insane that it took that long for them to go, yeah, you really weren't a witch. We screwed up and we're really sorry. But we're finally going to exonerate you. You're not guilty. You took 400 years to figure that out?
Mm-hmm.
That, or we always knew they weren't guilty. We just kind of maybe brushed it off or look back at this as, well, that was stupid, and
Right.
continue moving on without really ever addressing it.
Mm-hmm.
And now they've decided to like fully address what happened and then exonerate, like do a formal exoneration because it was never done before.
Right.
Because we now look at things these days, and I would say even in the decades of our parents and grandparents, look back at it and go, yeah, they weren't witches. Like that, no, that's not a thing that happened. No.
Right.
But
and even if they were, did
Right.
they really hurt anybody?
Well, like you could, some of the people, the accused, were people who made their own uh, medicinal, herbs, and using herbs and things from the forest, to help burns or, relieve headaches and stuff like that. Well, then I'm like, oh, look at that. She's got to be a witch because that's not what we do,
Right. There was
which
So,
makes me really wonder because, I mean, they went after the Puritans, like they turned on each other,
Mhm.
right? But we still had many Native American tribes in that time, which that was common for their tribes, and that's how they ran.
right,
They
right.
lived off the earth. I
Right.
sort of wonder why they weren't pulled into all of this stuff at that time, or were they?
Wasn't there
Hmm.
wasn't there at that time a French and British war going on?
Yep. Yep.
So I think the Indians, I think some of the, Indians were on the French, they were on the British side, maybe because of that, and all those other things going on. Because I thought some of this too was some of these people were people who had migrated from these other colonies because of these English and French war going on, and the
Mhm.
people of Salem didn't really like them coming in. It made their town grow bigger, made their resources grow less.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's a good question. Because how many people were taught by the Indians this kind of stuff,
Well,
to make
yeah.
this,
Right.
hey.
Sorry. Hi, Bella. Um, so yeah, I mean, when we came over here, we didn't know how to farm anything. We had to learn from the Indians because nothing that we were, putting in for our crops would grow because it was different soil
Yeah.
and they didn't know how to make anything grow. So, yeah, they looked to the Indians and go, okay, how do we do this? And, they taught them. And obviously there was some compensation in between. Oh, hi, Bella. Goodness. Yes, Bella. Thank you. Sorry. If they're not growling, they're in my face. It's one of the other. You're supposed to be tired. The other thing is, what was I going to say? I don't even remember what I was going to say. Oh, I know what it was. So I watched a video today and I kind of had a chuckle because this guy was talking about, he goes, look, we put, vegetables, herbs, stuff like that, herbs, meats, different types of, spices and stuff like that into this boiling water. Then we call it soup. He's like, last time I checked, the same stuff is the same stuff that they put in for witchcraft. So when you're making homemade soup, are you doing witchcraft? You just, obviously you're not saying some kind of spell, or maybe you are, you're just cussing under your breath because it's not going the way you want it to or whatever. But I kind of laughed at that. I'm like, I never thought of soup, making homemade soup, as you're actually doing witchcraft. But even so, I mean, if you think about it, from that time period, how many people have dabbled in the dark arts? Like they had spirituality stuff going on in, the late 1800s into early 1900s.
Yeah.
I always say my grandmother strict Catholic German little lady, 5'0" but she was reading tarot cards and she was really good at it. I would have never thought that I go to church every single day, maybe twice on Sunday. She literally lived a block away from church, would be into tarot reading. Tarot reading is part of technically witchcraft. Palm readers, stuff like that, So how many people back in the day have gone through and actually done actual witchcraft? I mean, they have covens now. I know somebody that was in a coven not too long ago. I don't know if she's still in it, but she was in it. She would, be a practicing witch.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fine now, but how do you know? Voodoo. There's voodoo and there's the opposite.
Santeria. There's Santeria though too. That's the mixture of the voodoo and Christianity.
Yeah. And we've got that all around the world. Everybody's got something different, but nobody's getting hung by those people,
And I think the way we see witchcraft now versus what the Puritans were thinking of witchcraft. The Puritans thought witchcraft was dabbling with the devil and you're doing the devil's work. Where we're learning now that today's witchcraft, as we call it, is really just those who are living more so in tune with nature.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's tarot reading and palm reading and stuff like that. And not that I don't believe any of that's true. In fact, I'm very intrigued by tarot reading. I don't believe that's like a devil's work, and that's not, those who read the cards are not expressing they're working with the devil to do that. But yet that's how the Puritans saw it. So their idea of witchcraft and today's idea of witchcraft are two completely different things now.
Right. I mean, if you were really to go back in that time period, modern medicine would be witchcraft.
Right.
Sure.
You made this medicine and you gave it to the person and now they're cured. What kind of devil worshiper are you? And
well, they would probably say you made them sick and that's why you were able to make them well. If you read a lot of this stuff, because it was so, like we said before, if you floated, you were a witch and they hung you, and if you sunk and you drowned, you weren't.
Right. I mean, the Holy Grail made that one. We talk about the Holy Grail, the movie, Mighty Python, and they talk about that,
right.
She's a witch. And well, if she's a witch, then she can float. And if she's like a duck, she's a witch. If she's like a piece of wood, she's a witch, you know. But I'm glad that we have gotten smarter. I don't know if that would be the correct word that I want to use. We're more intelligent than we were back then, in some aspects. Others we've kind of fallen behind, and I kind of talked about that the last episode. It's like we have our really smart moments, and then we have our really dumb moments in the world, and it just kind of goes up and down, up and down. And I think at that point we're at our dumb moment, but we at least learned from that, or at least the governor was smart enough to go, okay, look, this nonsense needs to stop. It's gone on long enough.
I find odd about that was he didn't really give a crap before that until it was his wife. Oh no, this is crazy. No, my wife's not a witch. Stop right now.
Yeah.
But
he had the power to do that, you know. But it, like I said, it didn't affect him until it affected him.
Just think the fear that those people at that year, that one full year or so that was going on, that if I leave my house, I could be doing something wrong or look at someone wrong, or if I stay in my house, then I'm guilty of something else because nobody wants to see me and I don't want to see them. And, you must have been terrified to do anything.
Yeah. I couldn't imagine living back then.
Yeah.
I'm glad that we've gone past that part, but, the people that actually had to endure that and the ones that were actually accused and that were hanged during the trials, the torment, the lost souls that are still probably walking around trying to prove their innocence. And I don't know how Salem is, paranormal wise, how haunted the place is.
I did see one showing it, and I don't remember who did it. It might have been those 5 or 6 guys from down south somewhere. I can't remember the Wraith Chasers. Maybe
yes,
maybe I think, but they did one, and they did it. What I remember of it, it was by where they hung everybody, that whatever it was called,
by the gallows.
Yeah, by the Gallows Hill or whatever. That's where they picked up a lot of stuff. But I haven't. That's a question I was going to ask you if you knew, because I haven't really seen much other than that one show.
Yeah, I haven't either, and I don't know if it's like taboo that they just don't want to.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even say taboo, out of respect.
Yeah.
That they just. I would hope that somebody would go there and help whatever souls are there to cross over.
If I remember right, too, they didn't go into a lot of buildings either. I mean, I think just a couple. They did most of the stuff outside. So
I would assume they would, though. I mean, if you think about it, back then the buildings, they're probably not there like they were.
Right, but like where the jail might have been.
Okay.
Like what's there, that might have energy all over the place.
Right.
But then they probably don't want somebody like Zach Baggins going there, and then, everything's the devil, and we're all being eaten and our souls are going. And that's, they don't want to look in that light. Like, that guy makes everything.
Right. And they've embraced it. And I think that's their way of, paying the penance of what they've done. Because I'm sure the people that are there now, some of those people have been there, their family lines have been there for these, 400 years. And so I'm sure that they're like, I'm very sorry. I don't know what else to do for those families. I mean, they did pay the families, but really, you get compensation. That's still not going to bring your loved one back. Even nowadays where, somebody dies and you get a big payout because of whatever had happened, that's still not going to bring your loved one back.
Right. Or people get accused of a crime, then they're found innocent 40 years later. Yeah, they give them $1 million, but they don't get their 40 years back. And the friends that they don't have, and the family that they don't see, and the birthdays
and how much has that affected them psychologically? Because now they're thrown back into a world that they don't know.
Yeah.
Right. Have either of you been there?
No, I would always like to.
I've been.
Yeah.
And I've been in the home of one of the judges where a lot of these accusations were made and stuff like that. Honestly, the only thing that bugged me the most about Salem is how touristy it got. It is very touristy, and I know there was ghost walks and stuff like that, but we weren't going to be there in the night. We were only there for one day, for an afternoon. But it did get very touristy, and I was saddened by that because it kind of took away the history for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed learning what I did. I enjoyed seeing the home, and some of the headstones and stuff like that. But
did you go see the wall, that little walkway wall? It doesn't seem like it's very big.
No, it's not. And I think if it wasn't so touristy, it wouldn't have taken it away for me, at least.
Mm-hmm.
But I think everybody should go see it, or just even be there.
Right.
Yeah, I would like to go. I'd still like to go there.
Did you go to the Salem Village, the other place where they were imprisoned?
I did not know. No, we just did that little area, and then we had to head out to Boston. So,
well, there's another historical place.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I wasn't there very long.
I think my kids were very bored, but I don't care.
Yeah, I was in Philadelphia not that long ago, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, the same things. It's very, very touristy and packed with people, but just being there and seeing the buildings and the Liberty Bell and all that stuff, I mean,
That's awesome.
yeah, it's
So
totally awesome.
you go to like Jamestown, Williamsburg, all those places, they go for the tourism, but they still keep a little bit of the nostalgia there, just enough that you feel like you're back in time.
Right.
So, I mean, I'd love to go see Salem just to have it on my bucket list and check that one off.
Yeah, I would like to go there.
And I like to go to Philadelphia too, because I mean,
yeah,
that
I mean, like I said, I'm a big history person. I love history. That's what I wanted to be when I was a kid, either an archaeologist or a history teacher. That was my two big things. And I really liked being in Philadelphia, but it was just so crowded with people, just so packed, and they pushed you through everything so fast that I felt I didn't have enough time to take everything in that I wanted to. And and like I said, I've never been to Salem, but I just get that feeling from what I saw just on research today. That. Well, I think it's the same thing. Like I think like in Transylvania for Dracula and Dracula's castle. I've watched many shows about that and how everything around there, was Dracula's bar, Dracula's tavern, Dracula's restaurant, and taken away from the whole historical part of Vlad the Impaler and everything that went on at that time.
Right.
Yeah, but what are you going to do? I mean, it gets people there.
It makes money for the town and the village, and that's what they need.
What I didn't see, and I mean, I didn't read everything, but I thought I read a lot. I never saw what was the population? Like how many of these, comparatively, like the percentage of, because I just don't picture it to be this huge place back then.
Yeah, I don't remember. Like
it seems like all these people, I mean, like all these people knew each other and were related to each other, and it just gives me the impression that it was a small, really tight knit group.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it tells the years of like different houses and stuff like that. It doesn't give a population.
Let's see if I can look it up, Bones.
Yeah, because it's like it says how far away it is from like Boston and Cape Ann. It's not that far away. Actually, it's not that far. The Salem Bay Harbor is 16 miles northeast of Boston. Wow, you really were close. It was incorporated as a town in 1626. And he immigrated from Cape Ann, which is 14 miles northeast. The first congregational church in America was organized there in 1629, and Roger Williams, the founder of Rhode Island Colony, served as its first pastor.
This is what I found on Google. It said Salem town proper, which had an area of approximately 8 square miles, had a population of 1,400 people in 1692.
That's a lot of people.
That seems like a lot of people.
Yeah. That's a lot of people for a little town like that.
Yeah. Yeah, three things I see in it now, they all get roughly that same estimate. So that's so it's bigger than I thought.
Right. Apparently the town's name is probably the shortening of the biblical well, let me actually read this here. So according to this about Salem, Massachusetts, it's also Salem Town, Salem House of the Seven Gables. The town's name is probably the shortened form of the biblical Jerusalem, city of peace. Salem's early history was clouded by the religious intolerance that led to witchcraft trials in 1692. During the 18th century and 19th century, it developed as one of New England's leading maritime and shipbuilding centers. And during the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812, its port served as privateer base. Interesting. So, yeah.
I mean, that you would think back in that time period, that had to be a pretty big area, big town then, 1,400 people. That just seems like a lot.
Right. Because I mean,
Which
there's a
then to
lot
me
of
even makes it more weird than that so many of these people knew each other or connected to each other, or with that many people,
right.
you wouldn't think it's only whatever that I said, 8 square miles. That, yeah, just that's really interesting to me because I never pictured it now to be that big. I thought it was just, a small little village,
Right.
a couple hundred
Maybe.
people.
Yeah, maybe 100 people.
Yeah, a couple hundred.
150
Yeah.
people. Yeah. But not 1,000. That's
No, yeah,
pretty
1,400 people.
substantial. So I just found a thing. It said in January of 1697, the Massachusetts General Court declared a day of fasting.
Mm-hmm.
The tragedy of the Salem Witch Trials. The court later deemed the trials unlawful, and the leading justice, Samuel Sewell, publicly apologized for his role in the process. The damage of the community lingered. However, even after Massachusetts colony passed the legislation restoring the good names of the accused, that they also got that inheritance of 600 pounds. That happened in 1711. So it still took them a while to get them money to the people.
Oops, sorry, my bad. Here's some money.
Right?
We hung your family. Sorry. I still think after all of this, I am 99%. This was just all personal stuff going on. This was all, like you said earlier, land deals and this and that, and just jealousy and, just people being different. Because, I mean, there's really, I don't know what kind of proof you would need, those days to be a witch, because obviously, if you sink or you float, that's not really proof. You know what I mean? And that's why they tried to get those, that thrown out of the court where these girls couldn't see, they come to me in my dreams and they, they do this. They could never describe what besides this, they told me I should do this in my dreams. And that's just, even back then, there was people smart enough to go, well, that's not really proof.
Right.
Okay, so then let's throw them in a river. That's proof.
Oh, look at that. They sunk.
Yeah, quick, pull them out,
Right.
Yeah.
Anybody know CPR? Oh, wait, CPR didn't even exist back then.
Yeah.
Right.
So, they look at that, like it said some of these people did drown. They couldn't pull them out fast enough. And then, so they pulled the body out in front of the family or whatever. And oh, well, you know what? She's not a witch. Excellent.
Right. But you can bury them at your cost,
Yeah.
We're very sorry. Hopefully it doesn't happen again.
I had read too that one of the main accusers who I was just looking at it, who testified against 60 different people, later on in years apologized and said, yeah, I basically made that all up. She was trying to get into the church. That's what she was. She was trying to get back into the church. And, that was she came and said, yeah, look, I was part of that. I didn't mean to do it. It just was something that was going on. So They let her into the church. And then they said she died of unknown causes a few years later.
Uh-oh. Was it witchcraft?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
Well, you now just killed all these people, so now they're going to come back and haunt you. So.
And I know this is silly. This is probably very silly. And maybe it's me just wanting karma. But I wonder if you are the cause of such horrendous ways of dying because of something you did. I wonder if you do get haunted, either by your own psychological guilt.
That's what I was just going to say. Your own haunting.
Or, we are in the subject of paranormal. Do you see that person afterwards? Are they watching over you and kind of haunting you a little bit because there's that anger and resentment towards you?
Right.
Yep.
Or couldn't it be both?
Yeah.
Sure.
You have that guilt of, oh my gosh, I did this. Now am I going to be able to go into heaven?
Right.
that bring heaven and hell into this thing. But that's what they were thinking is, are the Golden Gates going to open up for me now?
Yep.
Or did I just do a terrible thing and I'm never going to be forgiven?
Right. I mean, like the judges, did they go to their deathbed saying, I knew they were guilty, we did right?
Right.
Because I'm sure they mostly were, I would assume they were all passed away by the time these people were absolved of the, of these accusations of being witches,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And still I can't get past in my own head how they came up with these tests. Who sat around and going, okay, let's see if they, I'm going to scratch them till they bleed. If they bleed, they're guilty. If not, like, where does that come from? What was your thought process of people who are supposed to be intelligent and know the law and, just, it's just so weird, to me, that people who are supposed to be intelligent. Well, but you know what though? I was reading also they these judges would confer a lot with religious leaders.
Right.
So, how much was that part of the whole,
but
process?
they had a doctor look these girls over and go, I don't know what's wrong with them. They have to be bewitched.
Yeah. Well, they also put out leeches to cure you of cancer. So,
right. Or they bloodletting, we're going to lead you to death and hopefully that will solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that things that they did back then didn't lead to what we have now as modern medicine, because obviously it did, but the thought process behind it, like, okay, so I'm going to go out to the river there. I'm going to hopefully find a leech. I'm going to stick this on your body and you're going to be cured.
Take out the bad blood,
Right.
Basically was their thought process,
and their thought process probably wasn't terrible, because if we look back at how we've evolved, especially from like England, and we're looking at more of like the pre-Renaissance era, it was all about God.
Oh yeah,
Jesus, and that Catholic.
I mean, that's why the Puritans left, England, and for they were against being ruled by the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church at that time. And so you're right. I mean, religious persecution was part of everyday life back then.
Right.
Correct. And it was really, I mean, if you look at the artwork of that time, it was all religious based. And therefore, it didn't surprise me to hear like bad blood, good blood, bloodletting. You have to let out like the bad spirits almost.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just where that mindset was, because that's how things were in that culture in that time.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, even if you look at like the plague doctors, they've got this scary mask on, even though this, the mask itself is to have the herbs in there that the guy or girl, because they even had the plague nurses, would wear so that they didn't breathe in the toxic, wouldn't say fumes, but, anything that was contagious at that point, because, they did have, plagues going on back then.
Yep.
Smallpox was a big thing.
Yeah.
So they make it look like the plague doctor is scary.
Yep.
But it really wasn't. It was just to keep, instead of wearing a mask, because I mean, come on now, we've all lived through wearing masks now since COVID. And even all the way up until just recently, people are like, well, we still got to wear masks. I'm not getting into that whole thing with people, but being in healthcare, and yes, I have to wear a mask sometimes with my patients. I can still smell you, honey. If you're rancid, I can still smell you through my mask.
Yeah.
It's not until I wear an N95 that I don't smell it, because it's such a tight seal on my face. But if you're wearing a cloth or a cotton mask or something like that, it's not helping. So with the plague doctors, they had this thing thinking that would help with the smells and stuff like that.
Yeah. But that reminds me of Monty Python, and you said before, the bring out your dead, bring out your dead.
Yes. Yeah.
That's not so far from the truth, though,
Right. And some of these people look like death. I mean, they were dying. And
they're good Halloween costumes now.
Yeah, my son that's his thing. He loves the plague doctor. So he plays a plague doctor at Halloween time now. He's actually getting more and more stuff for his plague doctor stuff. But, they also took those people that were dying of smallpox, and they would have one person, they'd use that person, they cut off a piece of the smallpox, and they use that as a vaccination.
Yep.
I mean, it worked. Some people ended up getting, and it's still today, you get a vaccine, it does not mean that it's going to work 100% because they don't know the strain of it. The flu is like that. COVID is like that. There's different strains. So even smallpox, you might not have that strain in your body, so it doesn't affect you, but the person next to you, it's going to affect them, So it just depends. And they play that every year when you get your flu shots and your shingles shots and all that stuff and pneumonia shots. They're hoping that they get the right strain, but if not, you're probably going to have some of it. It's just going to happen, and that's what happened back then. Is you're playing Russian roulette, but on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
So, do you want the full blown? You're going to get smallpox and you're going to die as a result of it, or you get the vaccine and you don't have as bad of a reaction. You still have a reaction, but you're not going to die from it. So that's where they were at that point in their lives. These people back then were just going above and beyond.
Right.
And it hurt them it hurt innocent people in the long run.
Yeah.
And it had nothing to do with the government at that point. It was strictly the church.
Right.
They started it.
I wonder how many of the judges and the clergy benefited from some of this, or if they did, like you said, now this land's abandoned because we just got rid of the owners,
right.
And I want to expand my area now.
Right. And that's kind of what happened because, they would have to take over that land, and now they've acquired more land. A good example is the movie Tombstone. Wyatt Earp shows up in Tombstone with his family, and the sheriff at the time, he's like, "Hey, I'm the sheriff, and well, I'm not into, the law anymore. We're kind of done with that. We want to have land and, have our own businesses and stuff like that and live our life. Well, I'm also the person that has for, the properties too. So how many do you need?" And I've got 3 properties outside. So, I mean, where does it go? I mean, when you think about the deeds now, they're downtown at courthouses still, municipal buildings. So they still do that. And if they, if you don't pay your mortgage, it goes back to the bank.
Right.
So,
I mean, just imagine being there, and in Salem at this time, and then, the governor and everybody else goes, "Wait, stop, no more of this." How long did it take before you got back to not looking over your shoulder or making sure you didn't say the wrong thing or wear the wrong, always thinking someone's watching me, someone's looking at me.
Right.
I wonder how many people left that area because of it. Well, we know some of them because we talked about it.
Well, the one, he ended up going to Maine, and they still brought him back.
Why would you go back?
Right. What are you going to do? Are you going to, you're going to drag me back from Maine to Massachusetts for
but
what?
But you're probably also thinking, I don't know nothing about any of this. And you go back and you have a bunch of people saying, "Well, he's our leader." You're like, what are you talking about?
Right.
It's just, I guess you just start spewing out names like some of these people did, hoping to save themselves. And
if I take the heat off of me and put it onto somebody else, they'll leave me alone. But that's kind of like the what was her Tabor?
Tyr, I can't even say her name right. But...
Right.
But she did the same thing. Like, okay, I'm going to tell you, so then you're probably not going to go after me as bad. Yeah, I might get in trouble and might have to pay my dues in jail or something like that. But I'm not going to be in as much trouble. But that didn't save her.
Right. I think she was hung.
Yeah, I think she was too. Yeah.
Right. So it didn't save you, but it caused a huge amount of
Right, because who would have known if she
hysteria.
wouldn't have admitted guilt to it, what would have been the result? Because everything I read and what you talked about, Leah, was that like flipped the switch then. As soon as she said, yeah, I did it, then that got everybody so paranoid.
Yep.
And then everything just went, the start of that ball rolling, and that was that.
Yep. I'd be interested to find out, we were talking about the paranormal part of it. If anybody in our listening areas, if they have done anything investigation wise, or they live in the area and they know of something that happens in one of the homes or properties in Salem or around Salem, what they experience, and how does it affect Salem itself nowadays? Do they still brush it under the rug? No, we're not. We don't have any paranormal experiences here now. Or do they say, yeah, this place here is very haunted, and you should check it out?
Yeah.
There's a lot of ghost tours. It would have been really cool to go on one, but again, we weren't there for the evening. We were only there.
They do have a lot of. Did you say they do have a lot of ghost tours there? Yeah.
Yep.
Just like outdoor walk.
And I don't know about Salem, how Salem, their grave sites are. But like Charleston area, they're huge. The grave sites and the cemeteries are just massive. So, and you would think, okay, here's the people that were buried in the 1600s. They're going to be in this section, which is like at the beginning of the cemetery. And oh no, they're all spread out everywhere. You've got people that were buried in the 1900s in this section, and another, 3 people down, somebody was buried in 1682, and I know that you pick your plot and everything, but it's like, so nobody picked the plot for 300 years, and all of a sudden, 3 plots down, that's open. I don't know. But,
when we have our next meeting, I'll tell you my stories. I used to work in a cemetery.
Ooh.
Yeah. It's very.
That'll be interesting.
It was. Yeah, we'll talk about it at our meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think we talked all we can about Salem Witch Trials. I mean, there's a lot of history behind it, but unfortunately for 19 souls, they took the brunt of it all.
And I think for no reason, absolutely, besides petty jealousies and, whatever. I think it was just all a big, horrible happening. But
the nice thing is they still are remembered.
Yep.
In 2023, we're still talking about them.
Yep.
So we haven't been forgotten. And the atrocities that happened to them have not been forgotten. So that's always a plus. You can't erase the history, because otherwise you're not going to learn from it. And thank God we didn't erase that history, and we learned from it. And we are the people that we are today because of those people. And I mean, we wouldn't be able to be paranormal investigators if it wasn't for these people, Well, guys, I think that we've come to another pass of our episodes. So I guess we'll say goodbye and say good night until next week.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
We'll talk to you guys on Friday.
Yes. 5:15.
Yep. I know, Leo, you're not going to be there. It's okay.
I will be there.
Steve will be there. I'll be
I
there.
will be there. All right.
You'll be there in spirit. Our actor.
I'll see you guys.
All right. For our skeptics, keep us grounded. For our believers, keep believing. I'm Kathy, and good night.
Good night.